Marcus Hume-Humphreys. I'm Managing Director of Route 6, and I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you who are here at our Platform 1 event. The theme of this year's Platform 1 is the flexible facility of the future. Now, I've worked in this industry for an awfully long time, and I've seen many seemingly insurmountable technological barriers being overcome. Bill Gates strenuously denies that he ever said that 640 kilobytes of usable RAM should be enough for anyone. But the tale is too convenient an expression of the industry's sense that no one can be sure what's going to happen next. So what this event is not about is trying to predict the future, but what it is about is trying to inform you how some of today's technologies, carefully deployed, can set up your business for future challenges. And so I'm just very quickly going to run through our agenda. First of all, Phil Crawley is going to share with us some of his considerable expertise in looking at how to avoid some of the perhaps less obvious design and implementation pitfalls that can have long-term consequences. Phil will be talking about solutions for KVM over IP and about our research into serving HDSDI over a WAN. And thereafter, Rupert Watson will be talking about how current technology allows equipment owners to extend the use of equipment to remote locations and thus increase the earning potential of that equipment. Thereafter, David Skeggs will be talking through a recent Route 6 case study where we've made use of a range of products to offer a solution for content archiving, managing, retrieval and repurposing for a well-known production company. After lunch, Bill Baker and Owen Walker will share some of their considerable expertise on the AS11 DPP standard for broadcast deliverables. Implementing the AS11 DPP standard is complicated, and we'll show how we can help to relieve some of this pain. Bill and Owen are also going to touch on how Content Agent can be used to automate the creation of a wide range of file types in a number of configurations and formats for applications beyond pure broadcast. There'll be a short break at 3:15, and then sorry, I missed that one. And then Jason Jenner from Pixit Media is going to talk to us about current and future storage technologies. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Phil Crawley.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
Isn't it encouraging that storage for the future, there's a little graphic of a floppy disk? I'm an old school broadcast engineer, and I kind of hope that at some point we're going to wake up from this nightmare of file-based and go back to doing telly as it should be on 1-inch videotape. But, as I say, I'm Phil Crawley. I run SI projects at Route 6. I've been doing it for about 11 years now, a bit more than 11 years. And before that, I ran engineering in a couple of the larger Soho facilities. Did lots of location work, Big Brother, Fame Academy, they were a couple of mine. And before that, I was 5 years at the BBC in 1980. Never you mind, that's not important. We do lots of SI projects, everything from one man and his dog, and a couple of avids in the back of the production office type boutique operations, all the way up to big broadcaster facilities. So we moved ITV last year from Key Street in Manchester to Media City. Very big job. We recently moved Technicolor from Perivale to Pinewood Studios. Again, another multi-machine room, dozens and dozens of cabinets in each, and big jobs. But we also do the little ones as well. And we try to develop an expertise in the more kind of optimal end of things. So you come to us for fibre, and we'll do you a proper fibre build, whereas we see lots of other SIs perhaps not doing quite an optimal fibre job. Data, we got into 10 gigs very early, and we're just about to step up to the newer technologies of Cat8, 40 and 56 gigabits. And the thing we spend a lot of time doing at the moment is, as Marcus has alluded to, KVM and HDSCI over IP networks, both local area networks and wide area networks, even the public internet. So it's the kind of thing we're doing at the moment. So, fantastic. So this presentation, I mean, it looks like two subjects, but actually it's just a chance for me to convey how well, both economically and technically, a job can go if you pay attention to some of the things that well, certainly I've learned over more than a quarter of a century in this. And because TV and film are still an inherently technical business, I've got to give a quote over to the great Feynman, one of the great scientists of our time. I learned very early the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Very important to realise that difference. But as a starter, we say, how are you going to get the best out of your SI? You know, you want to build a new facility or you want to move an existing facility, how are you going to get the best out of your SI? Well, we'd say you get the best really by listening to us. And today is a chance for me to be brutally honest, to really tell it to you like it is, the way that I couldn't when we're at a proposal stage or when we're starting to do all that pre-sale stuff. And you're at liberty to go and choose ATG, TSL, or one of those other fine systems integrators. And the thing I'd like to sort of pass over is that we've eaten a lot more salt than you have rice. And what I mean by that is, if you imagine the tiny amount of salt you put in a bowl of rice, we've eaten more of the salt than you have of the rice. We've done this an awful lot. If I go back over my purchase orders database, over the last 10 years, I've bought more than 1,000 audio patch panels. That's quite a lot of audio patching. And I've watched an awful lot of wiremen wiring them. So when your chief engineer tells me that he looks at my proposal and he's seen how many days I've allocated to audio patch panels, and he tells me that his wireman can do it in half the time that my wireman can, it doesn't hold a lot of sway, and it's very hard to take that kind of thing seriously. There's also a temptation at build time, at proposal time, to go with the cheap rather than I won't say the best, because the best is often the enemy in these situations, but to go with something that doesn't require that we'll fix it later. In this example, fibre optic cabling. Customers often choose what we call tight buffered cable over what we recommend, loose tube splice cable. And the total cost of ownership is always much higher in that first example. Pre-morteming a proposal. That's a great phrase, isn't it? The pre-mortem. Thinking about all the terrible things that can go wrong in a project before they happen, and never being optimistic until something has been done and dusted and handed over. There's one big job we did a couple of years ago for a very big film company, where their air conditioning, which was a brand new water-based air conditioner, which apparently amongst green-minded people is just the thing nowadays, but this thing burst the leak and flooded their main production area with thousands of litres of water. So the 6 weeks' worth of cabling work essentially had to be undone, all taken out, and then redone. But of course there was no fat on the timeline, there was no capacity for us to do that, and so we had to run engineering and wiring shifts around the clock. And of course at that point the customer was very unhappy to pay for those differences. And I don't think they ever got the money back from their insurance company. So just putting a bit of fat on the quote at the start is always a good thing. Now, there, bottom right, fast, good and cheap. That's the sort of the classic project management triangle. And what a project manager will tell you is you can have 2 of those things, you can't have 3 of them. And customers often regard that as a prohibition that project managers say just to kind of annoy them, you know. But what I think it is it's a very realistic way of thinking. You can't push all 3 failures to the max and expect to have a sensible project. Timely projects are always the best ones. Something that the BBC DMI project could have learned from. I mean, running a project for 5 years without any end in sight really is a recipe for disaster. So, moving on, find it here. More than a decade of hard data relating to build projects. So, we have the benefit of 10 years worth of proposal, quote, and final spend audits on millions and millions of pounds worth of project spend. And some of the things that come out, this is very interesting. Typically, we use 25% more contractor time than our job list would have suggested. You know, if we, I alluded to audio patch panels earlier, that's just one tiny little bit of most projects. But if you think about an audio patch panel taking a skilled wireman maybe a day to wire and test, surely 20 panels would take that guy 20 days, or 20 guys 1 day, or some combination. But it doesn't seem to. It seems that despite us adding up all the time for all the things we know wiremen have to do and engineers have to do, actually we use about 25% more manpower time on these jobs than our list would suggest. And we think that's just down to customers and bad organisation. Having to wait for rooms to be made available, having to wait for builders to clear an area. On one big job we did last year, we had a consistent wait for 12 wiremen every morning of half an hour while security signed them in. Now that's 6 man-hours a day, and that's proper money. Now, at the time, the customer was adamant that they couldn't circumvent their security procedure, but once we'd sort of started submitting change requests every week to cover the time, 6 wireman days every day, day in, day out, they suddenly realised that actually they could change their security procedures. But having said all those kind of gotchas and things that bite us in the backside when we're getting ready to do projects, I'd now like to spend a bit of time thinking about the ideal facility. I'm building the ideal facility in my mind, suitable for our file-based workflows and our flexible, multi-resolution facilities that people are after now. And if it was my money to spend, how would I do it? Well, the first thing I'd pay attention to is the mains, the electricity. Because, of course, electricity is the thing that runs your facility. It's also the thing that kills people. We don't have big CRT monitors anymore, so there's no dangerous things going on there. But mains is still the thing that potentially can kill people. Now, we kind of hope that when you appoint a systems integrator, that if you get a chance to go look at their workshop, there's a well-thumbed copy of the 17th edition sitting on their shelf. Because BS 7671, which is what guides us all in electrical safety, is that's the legislation that applies at the moment. And here are some of the few things that people tend to get wrong. Well, not exactly wrong, but not optimal. A crew of electricians wiring a building for an office or even for a data facility and don't know about some of the special requirements needed for film and TV facilities. Pretty much every piece of equipment we use in modern television production is an inductive load. It's got spinning hard disks, it's got big switch mode or resonant mode power supplies, and those things are what we call an inductive load. Now, I wander around lots of Soho machine rooms and further afield, and almost uniquely, unless we have a hand in them, they're populated with what we call C-rated breakers. A C-rated breaker is a safety device for a resistive load, not an inductive load. And as a consequence, you have to overrate and you have to expect a certain number of false positives when the breakers break. So much better to use a D-rated breaker, which electricians who aren't used to building television facilities don't really know about. The technical earth, very important. And it's the kind of things I see electricians getting wrong again and again. And if only they kind of come to us from the get-go and say, how do we properly wire the technical earths for a television facility? Balancing the phases. This photograph here was one I took a week ago at a facility in Soho. This is their incoming supply. And you can see that on one phase they're using 40 amps, on the next phase they're using 48 amps, and the third phase is so underused that it's not even measuring anything. So if you do the numbers, if you add those up, that facility is actually paying twice as much per kilowatt hour for their electricity than they should. And, did nobody pay any attention? Did nobody look at that when the thing was being built? I suspect not. As I say, electricians will generally produce a safe and compliant installation, but not always suitable for film and TV. When you have your facility handed back to you by the SI who's built it for you, you should expect a good set of test results. Earth continuity, insulation, run current, leakage, flash tests for all electrical circuits. There's one SI who we come up against quite a lot, and they make their own they look very nice power distribution units that you see at the top of a cabinet in a machinery. And I'd heard that they don't pass the earth leakage test, those strips. And so when I got a chance to get one on my bench and experiment, I did indeed find that to be the case. That even their power distribution units can't pass the 3.5 milliamp regulation of the 17th edition. And so if their PDUs can't do that, how is the whole machinery passing any kind of safety test? So here's a chance for me to, as I'm still building this ideal facility in my mind, we have to now talk about the machine room, and it's a chance for me to critique IT system builders one more time, because they get this wrong so often, and that's the idea of how you cool a machine room. Now, the standard in IT is to use the hot-cold arc system, where you push cold air at the front of the equipment cabinets, because most modern equipment vents front to back. and you extract the hot air at the back. It sounds very sensible. But the problem is that IT machine rooms, server rooms, data centres, they tend not to get the... they're not the same kind of living, active machine rooms that we're used to. You know, if you don't want to enter your machine room often, if you don't want to come in and, heaven forbid, put a videotape into a machine, if you don't want to have to lift the floor and run in some new cables, then by all means go down the hot cold aisle cooling system. You know, it works in data centres, but in an active and working television machine room, it's a recipe for bad economy, because over time, as you lift the floor, things get a bit looser. As you run new cables in and out of the machine room, as people walk in and out of the machine room, it's just a very inefficient way of cooling the place down. There's one facility that we visit regularly, and I've been recording the pressure on their main chiller every time I've been in their machine room since 2011. And in the last 3 years, the pressure output on that chiller has gone up nearly 100% to accommodate the fact that the machine room is now a lot leakier than it was when it was originally built. You have to remember that IT has had Cat 6 as its standard for sort of 10 years now, and an OM3 fibre for 5 years. IT doesn't move as quickly as we do. You know, in television, we're used to technology refreshes, you know, every 18 months, every 2 years. And so, ironically, the old traditional way of cooling the machine room, of dropping cold air from the top of the bays, is actually by far the better option, and I encourage our customers to do that. There's also the argument for not trying to fight nature by pushing cold air up in front of the bays, which I think is equally valid. And here I've got my obligatory sort of 2 comedy pictures. You know, I'll leave you to guess which one of those was built by Route 6, but it wasn't the one on the left. But you can see that by careful planning of where your switch ports are configured, where your patch panels are placed, you can avoid all this kind of rat's nest of long patching cords with something that looks very, very good and is very maintainable as well. I mean, if I had to find a fault, I know which of these 2 rooms I'd like to be doing it in. You know, just another thing worth bearing in mind if you're handing your installation over to an IT contractor rather than a broadcast contractor. So here we go, cabling. Cabling's hardly the kind of the sexy, interesting stuff of a flexible 21st century facility. Traditional cabling, video, audio, data, fibre. But people still need to look at real, honest-to-goodness synchronous HD video for grading purposes. And I'm told that's where there's still money in facilities. You know, ironically, where you still need the traditional stuff. And we've maintained and keep up an investment in expertise and tooling to terminate and test all current standards. We've been commissioned by Bryant Broadcast and Tektronix on several occasions to test to destruction new cable styles as they come on the market. So we have a lot of experience, a lot of good test results that show us just how far 3G digital video will go down different kinds of cable. And our wiring guys are off starting a Cat 8 training next week. Cat 8, who would have thought that could have come? But you know, when you start looking towards 40, 56 gigabit connectivity in your facility, come and talk to us, because we'll have done it a bit already by the time you do. Now, fibre, you know, I've already mentioned it. There needs to be fibre in an optimal rather than a it just works fashion. And you know, it's one thing we got into early. We're running lots of machines. Most of our wiring staff are now trained in the use of bespoke fibre machines. And so, again, it's something we try and you know, make a niche for ourselves with. That eye pattern there, I snapped that on my phone in a Soho MCR last month. And the engineer was complaining to me that the piece of equipment that we just sold them wasn't making good recordings. It had sparkling, it had digital dropouts on its inputs. And when I took my trusty Tektronix from the workshop and put it up on his feed, he was quite surprised, because there were a dozen brand new tile lines that had just been running for him, and they just weren't up to the job. And so, you know, go with people who've done this lots. Now, from the machine room through cabling to technology choices, and for me, you know, I'm not going to say Avid or Final Cut or whatever, but the underlying infrastructure technology that relates to this imaginary facility that I'm building in my mind, so seeing through to my old age. And the thing that seems to become very significant over the last 5 years is KVM, extending the keyboard, the video, and the mouse from the workstation out to the nice, comfortable edit screen. And The technology, because for 10 years or more, we've been putting in fibre extenders for KVM. It's quite expensive and not flexible. But the thing that we're convinced about now is the importance of KVM over IP, using your commodity computer network to be able to route KVM traffic around your building. And from an economy, features, scalability point of view, we've come down on teradici-based KVM, and in fact, more specifically, we've come down on Amulet hotkey. We've been very diligent about this. 2 years ago, we had a big shootout between Amulet, Avocent, Adalink, ThinkLogical, the 4 big players in the market at the time. Although Amulet really was kind of something of a new entrant at the time. And just from a point of view of economy, Amulet, as I say, they're a teradici-based solution based on an open hardware standard and an open protocol standard. They're based around VMware's VDI display extension technology. And so consequently, they play in a market where there are alternate vendors. You know, you sometimes find Amulet gear being used with EVGA gear and Dell monitors that have the receivers built into them and things like that. So it's not something that's a special piece, especially made for the film and TV industry. And security. Although one of those other providers does use proper symmetric key crypto for their connection, they don't do their ephemeral key exchange properly. And so if you were the bad guy, if you were the man in the middle, watching their remote desktops as they were sent across the network would be easy. Amulet, as far as we can tell, they're the only ones who actually do it right with proper ephemeral key exchange and proper asymmetric crypto for their KVM extension technology. And if you're in the film and TV business where you have to answer to people like FACT, the MPAA and Marvel, you better have a KVM system that stands up to scrutiny when they start talking about encryption. Scalability. Now, when people say scalability, they normally mean how big does this thing scale? How many seats can we put on this thing? In the case of Amulet, they've got installations of more than 1,000 seats because they come from the banking world where you've got huge trading floors of hundreds of dealers. But that scalability also applies down as well. And the way we like to think about that is how many of these systems scale down to, gracefully scale down to internet-type bandwidths. How many of these systems allow you to route your KVM extender over the public internet? And Amulet, you know, a teradici-based solution, so far is the only one we found that does that and does it nicely. And we've got working examples of people who have KVM routed over the public internet and they have a nice Avid Media Composer experience at the other end. Now, of course, the other part of being able to extend your desktop over a local area network or over a wide area network is being able to take an HDSDI stream as well. If you're grading, if you're compositing, if you're a VFX artist, you really need to be able to see what the SDI looks like. Just looking at the little quarter frame playback window on your GUI monitor isn't good enough. And so, after lots of playing with different solutions, we've come down on Antrica as being our preferred manufacturer of KVM over IP. And we're just, you know, these last 2 weeks started to demonstrate a little portable demo kit where we can come to your facility, we can plug this into your monitors, your keyboard, your mouse, your corporate network, and show you editing on an Avid back at one of the Route 6 offices over the public internet. Now, it's not, you know, you have to have a half decent internet connection, but a good quality domesticated ASL does the job. SDI routers. You know, gone are the days of the £400,000 enterprise SDI router, the big 256 squared router from the likes of Everts or ProBell or those kind of people. You know, as baseband video really becomes less and less significant to us, spending that kind of money on a big router is becoming less and less, you know, maintained, less and less tenable. Unless you're a transmission facility where you need that 5 nines of reliability, we found, and I hate to use it, the B word, we found that Blackmagic are really quite a competent provider of routers now. We've put in 3 of their big 288s over the last year, and you know, in big companies you've heard of, and in fact, in one instance, big terrestrial television programs are transmitted through it, and we found no problems whatsoever. And so, you know, my choice in my dream facility would not be to spend, you know, the best part of £500,000 on an enterprise HDSDI router. I'd be spending £50,000 on a Blackmagic one, and I don't say that's about many Blackmagic products. Monitors, you know, the lifeblood of television, the proper grade 1 monitor. The drought is over. For many years, we were kind of half-heartedly trying to tell people that LCDs were kind of good enough now, almost, yeah, I mean, I know the colour imagery is right, the black performance ain't all there, and the off-axis colour performance isn't all there, but what else are you going to do? You know, you're not going to keep your D24s running for yet another year, are you? But the last 2 years have seen Sony OLEDs, both in their PVM and BVM range, really hit the mark as to what's needed for television monitoring, from both a colorimetry and a black performance point of view. And we have no hesitation in recommending OLEDs for use in pretty much all applications there. Test and measurement. Being an old school video guy, Tektronix has always been my touchstone. And I think to this day, if I was spending money on test and measurement equipment for baseband video or audio, Tektronix would always be my choice. They're not the gold-plated, 10 times the price option that they used to be. They have some very competitively priced products just at the right point in the market. But I wouldn't waste my money on anything other than Tektronix. VidChecker, that's our favourite file-based QC tool. And we've played with most of them. In fact, we've sold most of them. But VidChecker is the one we've landed on as being the closest thing to a pain-free DPP checker than the others. It integrates nicely with MAMs and transcoding platforms. In fact, my colleague Bill will be talking about that a bit later on today. But, we spent a lot of time demoing VidChecker to people, and its ability to correct as well as check and produce DPP compliant reports is what we think sets it apart from all the others. Now remember, I'm still in my imaginary facility here that I'm building. And documentation, it kind of goes without saying, doesn't it? But a full cable schedule as built, not as designed, as built, because things do change during the process. Schematics, network and fibre test sheets, and you want to know that nice Cat8 cable, I just mentioned it again, that Cat8 cable that you've paid for because Route 6 was so good, you want to know that it performs to 50 gigabits per second. And unless you've used an SI who really does have the right test equipment, you can't be sure of that. Just putting a little £100 one's test tool on it doesn't tell you very much at all. Mains feeds. Every single mains feed in your facility should have a safety test sheet with it that shows that it's been tested for those 5 parameters that I talked about earlier. Manuals collected together, complete network schemas with IP ranges and switch configurations, all that kind of stuff. So that's what you'd expect to get. And if you don't, come and talk to us next time. But now, moving on from my dream imaginary facility that I've built in my mind, I want to give you some warnings from some of the things that we've seen over the last decade, some of the things that have really bit us in the backside. When SI projects go bad, that could be an 8 o'clock in the evening documentary on the Discovery Networks, couldn't it, when SI projects go bad. But a decade's worth of observation of the very best and very worst clients, and I apologise already for saying that, but they come in both kinds. The thing we've noticed with big broadcasters and big film companies is they have in-house people who are already assigned as project managers. And the disturbing trend is that they tend to be very conversant with Prince2 or some other project management methodology, but they're often not broadcast engineers. They're often not technical people. In fact, they're often not even IT people. They're not even people who have any kind of technical training. And the problem there is they tend to be disinterested in the way that non-technical people are, and they tend to be dismissive rather than show their ignorance. And so we always say it's a good idea to have a project manager who's kind of walked the walk before, knows his stuff. Getting a good deal. Everybody wants to get a good deal. But when I'm quoting for a job and the customer starts talking about discounts and good deals from the outlet, it raises a red flag for me. If somebody's cheap, they'll want to reap where they do not sow, and they'll want to take value out of this kind of long after we've burned all our margin, and there'll be a problem. And so consequently, we start putting fat on the quote where you won't be able to see it. And so, as soon as you start start talking about getting a good deal, rest assured you're not going to get a good deal. Just be straight with us and we'll be straight with you. People often ask to use their own staff. And they want to use their own engineers, they want to use their own runners rather than employing our wiremen. And it never works nicely. We had one job 5 years ago now where they insisted on sending us their engineers, and they rotated them so that we got a different engineer every day to help us. And the day the chief engineer was with us, he cut £2,000 worth of video cable out of the wrong stock. And of course, the customer's never happy to pay for that again. And you don't want to embarrass the poor bloke, but it just never works for us. People should have day jobs. If you can afford to lose an engineer for the day, you could argue that you've employed too many engineers. Now, contractors. We come in as a contractor, that's what we do. But often on big builds, the builder is the primary contractor, and the aircon guy, the electrician, the data guy, they're all appointments of the builder. But we tend to be a direct appointment to the customer. And so the builder doesn't like that, because he's not making his 10% off route 6 like he is off all the other guys. And getting access to the risers, getting access to the underfloor voids when we need them, we're always last in the pecking order. We're always the last people to be told that floor is going to be lifted today for you to get your cables under. And so I'd encourage you, if you're ever in that position, it might seem counterintuitive, but get us appointed by the builder rather than by yourselves. Having the electrician or the data guy or somebody else running the Cat6 cable, it happens a lot and it's never pretty. If you ever watch a good broadcast wireman, they're masters of what they do and they never do things twice. So if I watch a wireman bringing in 700 Cat6 cables into a machine room, and he's got the schedule, the printed schedule, and so he knows where each of those cables is going in the machine room. By his very nature, or her very nature, they're grouping them into the right cabinets as they bring them into the machine room. And as they bring them down the machine room, they're starting to think about how do I group these to go to the right patch panels. They're kind of thinking about it the whole time. But with electricians and data guys, they tend to just bring them all into the machine room and leave them in a big pile under the cabinets where they're going. And that's the worst for us when we have to inherit that, when we have to take over that, and we find these cables that takes weeks and weeks to comb out, and then realise that half of them haven't got the right numbers on, and realise that some of them have got duplicate numbers on, and things like that. And it's very hard for us to take that on the chin and say, yes, we'll cover the cost of that. And customers are they're never happy to have to pay twice for those things. So again, don't make that suggestion, because it never ever pays you a dividend. It always costs more in the end. Now, learn from Henry Ford. Contractual timescale might sound again counterintuitive, but a contracted timescale means you can have enough freelance staff so that they specialise. On a recent job, I was in the fortunate position of having between 12 and 18 wiremen on the go. And so the guys I knew who were really good at fibre, they just did fibre. The guys who were really good at data just did Cat6. The guys who were really good mechanically just built bays and built wall boxes and did all those kind of things. And it pays dividends. It really allows us to get through the job a lot quicker. That kind of brings us on to the subject of time. That recent job that I just mentioned, the compressed timescale, it was moving Technicolor from Perivale to Pinewood. And it really was a very compressed timescale. We had 10 weeks to build 2 machine rooms, so that's kind of 38 and 32 cabinets in the different machine rooms, 20 post-production rooms, and it was really only doable by paying attention to the project management triangle. The customer couldn't be cost conscious in that situation, because they weren't able to buy their way out of having extra time. The timeline is always good, so long as you have a realistic timeline, and that serves you well, and you keep it up to date. You don't try and bash on with the timeline that slipped 2 weeks later. And at least 1 week, I would say, is needed to understand the workflow of a facility. You have to be on site for at least a week to really understand how it all works. If you're moving facilities, you will undoubtedly be shedding lots of legacy equipment. If you're building a new facility, you'll obviously be buying lots of new equipment. And those kind of things need the buy-in from your staff. And so analysing the workflow is doubly important. So here's a few thoughts on big organisation technical projects, the kind of things that we do not that often, maybe once or twice a year, but consume us for months on end. There's a danger of a customer having the attitude of not invented here, or nobody understands what we do except us, a sort of arrogant attitude. And I came across it most when I was working at the BBC. The BBC had a department called Research Department, which was responsible for custom projects. So anything where they weren't buying in equipment from the outside would go to Research Department. And so consequently, it was probably being done by somebody who'd done it once or twice before, not hundreds of times before. And there was a guy there in Research Department who loved the DEC Microvax 3100 series mini computer. It's a word you don't hear very much anymore, isn't it? A mini computer. But it was quite common in the 80s. And whenever there was a project that needed a computer for something, if you needed to upload new weather symbols to the paint box between the local and the national weather forecast, suddenly you'd see a Microvax appear in the machine room. If you needed to be able to download from Reuters financial data to put on the strap for for the financial segment in the breakfast show, suddenly a microvax will appear, another £35,000 industrial computer. And that kind of gold plating, you have to use the solution we've used all the time already, was kind of shown to be not so relevant when the project to control logo generators from the accident capture generator was handed to the maintenance department. And of course, because we all had BBC Micros at home, a £350 computer, and we all knew how to program and homebrew them, immediately we throw a BBC Micro at it, and it worked just as nicely as it would have done with the 35 grand microbags. So don't gold plate things. That's a bit of a danger. Don't reinvent wheels. I had a friend who worked for a couple of years on the National Health Service unified record system, and a bit of his job was to write a protocol for a VPN system. Now he was the first to admit that VPN is done already. There are several very good open source and closed source VPN solutions that they could have used, but because a non-technical project manager was driving it, he was more than happy for EDS to tell them they needed a new VPN solution, and however many developers and however many years that took was what it was paid for. Don't despise project management methodologies. And lots of engineers are very suspicious of Prince 2, that somehow it takes away from the technical nature of the build. But I would say that for sub-million-pound jobs, Prince 2 has onerous overheads. But there are lots of great principles that you can take from Prince 2 and apply even to very tiny projects. Our staff Prince 2 practitioner is Matt Ward, my colleague, and we did a bit of a post-mortem on a job that got a tiny bit wrong a couple of years ago. And the thing that really jumped out at us was that the staff project manager at the broadcaster just hadn't involved the users at all. He hadn't involved the editors, the dubbing mixers, etc. And of course, at delivery time, when they came to populate this new facility, they were of course unhappy. It'd been designed almost entirely without their input. Which brings me on to that last point of specifying. You can't specify too much. If you leave it to Fortune or the systems integrators' sort of view of your system, there will be problems. And that, I suppose, brings us all the way back to don't disregard experience, that Feynman quote I had at the very start. Don't disregard people who've done this a lot already. And the engineer who taught me all I know about broadcast SI is a guy called Chris Clegg, a very, very brusque northerner. Good guy, but a very brusque northerner. I like what I say, and I say what I bloody well like. And that was his kind of attitude. And one of the things he used to say a lot was that quote there. Given a crew of qualified operators, they should be able to run this studio, OB truck, edit facility, machinery, with only 15 minutes instruction from the usual operator. And you can't do that unless you understand TV workflows when you're designing that facility. And the best project managers have years of experience in these areas, and they're ex-engineers. So before I hand back to Marcus, I just wanted to make you all aware of something we've been doing for a while now, something for our industry colleagues. It's called Route 6 Ask Us Anything. And it's a series of Google Plus Hangouts that we do, typically Friday mornings. There are some of our previous ones. We've gone over some really quite interesting stuff. If you have a Google Plus account, hit us up, friend us up on Google Plus, and who nowadays doesn't have a Google account? Route 6 Limited is our username there. And over recent weeks we've talked about audio loudness, 4K, the rebirth of telecines, which is quite an interesting one, and colorimetry and what we do in our colorimetry offerings, OLEDs, Cat8, PSE and the DPP. And tomorrow, so that's Friday, tomorrow at 10 o'clock, we'll be talking a bit more about the 17th edition for electrical safety facilities, and different grades and types of fibre cable and where they're appropriate, what they're used for. And so you're welcome to come and join the discussion, or just lurk in the background, or even if that's too ominous for you, we archive them on our YouTube channel, where you'll also find all of today's sessions, and in fact sessions from Platform 1s in years long past, and BVE and things like that. So come try and join us tomorrow, and they'll be quite good. They're quite fun. They're not as inside baseball, as techie as they say. There's a lot of laughs, and you'd be very welcome. But thank you very much.